So one of the fundamental building blocks that we need to understand in any kind of communication, but especially in interpersonal communication, is what we call a transactional model. And you can find this in just about any interpersonal communication book, certainly in the one that has been used for this class. So I'm going to go through and talk about the transactional model in three different parts because it's a little complicated and the videos get too long. We just kind of need to break it up a little bit. So part one here is going to deal with what are called channels. And you don't know what that means yet, but you will here in just a few minutes as we talk about this. So, and to help you better understand this, it's probably best that you also illustrate this within your notes, meaning that you go through and draw this model out the way I will be drawing it out here within this presentation. So I'm going to start with a circle, and I'm actually going to duplicate that circle on the other side. So the circle is on the left side here for a reason. And I'm going to bifurcate that circle. I'm going to divide it in two because that circle represents a speaker, you and I, okay? And as we speak, we are both the source, meaning that we're putting out information, and we're also receiving information, okay? So we all act as transactional, and this is where the name comes from. We simultaneously send and receive information. Now that's interesting to note because it wasn't until like the mid-'80s when scholars decided that we were not linear communicators, meaning that we speak, we stop, we listen, we stop, we speak, like you're talking on a walkie-talkie, for example. You key the mic, you talk, you unkey the mic, and then you listen. Communication is not that way because communication is packed, right? We have both verbal and nonverbal cues going on. So they later changed that, like I said, about the mid-'80s into this idea of the transactional model in that we simultaneously send and receive information. And we do that with at least one other person in interpersonal communication, with only one other person. And we send back and forth within this dyad. We'll talk about dyads a little bit later. Two people make up a dyad. Within this dyad, then, we have a channel. And within that channel, these arrows represent messages going back and forth between the source receiver and the source receiver, okay? And that's what makes us transactional, going back and forth. Not rocket science, it's pretty straightforward to understand. But within the channel, and this is where we start to get a little bit complicated, there are a number of different channels that we use to go through and try to send data, try to send information, and try to receive information. So I'm going to go through these channels with you on this part one then of the transactional model. The first channel being that of the vocal channel, okay? And you'll see these go back to the senses for the most part in terms of how we go through and draw in data around our environment to go through and interpret that and find some kind of meaning. The vocal channel, not a sense necessarily, but obviously it's organic. We need a couple things in order to use the vocal channel. We need to breathe, and we need to have some vocal cords to go through and do this, and we need a few other items to go through and kind of crunch the words together. We have a tongue that moves back and forth and clicks against teeth, bottom and top, and a palate and a resonation of the soft palate, and all these kinds of tools that we use to go through and speak. And chances are you probably haven't even ever thought about this until now. And then it's quite phenomenal when you think about what it takes for us to go through and speak. In fact, let's look at that word, phenomenon. What does it take for us to say the word phenomenon? Go ahead. You can say it. Ready? Go. Phenomena. Okay? All right. So we're going to begin with the first part of the word, the P-H-E, the F sound, F. F. Go ahead and say that. F. What does it take for you to go through and say F? In terms of articulation, what the mouth is doing, obviously we have to breathe. F, and put that out there. Then we go through and we kind of chew that F sound, right? Not really. F, we're going through and we're taking our bottom lip and we're just barely gracing the bottom of our top teeth, and we have enough air pressure that's being generated by our breath to go through that very tiny opening. In fact, the bottom lip and the bottom of the teeth don't even touch. F, f, okay, they make that sound. And then we add tonality to that with our vocal cords. F, 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 f. Okay, you get it? Yeah. See, that's complicated. There's nothing really simple about that. There's some cultures that don't have the F diphthong in it, or like in French cultures, they don't have the TH diphthong, and it's difficult for them to go through and pronounce that because their mouths are not conditioned through repetition to go through and create that sound. So, and that brings us to na, f, na. What does it take to make the N sound? You're taking your tongue and you're sticking it up on the roof of your mouth, just behind your front teeth. N, n, and then you're dropping it. F, na, na. And that na is just a natural sound with the mouth open. You don't really have to do that short O. F, na. It comes pretty naturally that way. One reason why no, if you will, is one of the first words we learn as infants is because it's very important to understand and to learn that word, and also it's one of the simplest ones to make with our mouths. F, na, m, m. Now we're going to take the lips. Go ahead and do it. Take your lips, put them together, okay, and then intonate that and let them vibrate. Ready? Go. M, and then just open the mouth. M, f, na, m, m. Well, I said no was one of the first words we say. Actually, m or ma is one of the first words that we make, because here all we have to do, taking your tongue and putting on your hard palate, is more complicated than just ma, just vibrating the lips, ma, and opening up your mouth. Let me tell you a little story about this, in fact. A little on the personal side, but that's okay. I've used this to teach with before. This is myself with my son, Barrett. And here he's about 2 years old here. And if you look at him, you probably wouldn't see anything that's really abnormal maybe about him, other than maybe the way his left arm is twisted around. This little guy was born with a couple of conditions, one of which was stripped away the myelin in his brain. It made it so his brain couldn't go through and talk to the rest of his body. This happened at birth. Okay, so right before he was born, his mother received an overdose of a drug that's used to induce labor called Pitocin. And that overdose went through and did the brain damage in my son, in this little boy. So as a result, he had a disconnect between his major motor functions and his brain. And as a result, there are a lot of things that he couldn't do that you and I do on a regular basis, like swallow or speak, for that matter. But we went through some interesting times with him. We spent a lot of time in the hospital the first year and a half of his life. He was at Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. And then we worked with him all throughout his short young life in physical therapy and occupational therapies to get him to be able to interface better and be more comfortable in his life. One of the things we wanted him to be able to do was to have the ability to speak, to be able to articulate, to express to us what needs might be there. And his physical therapist worked with him in terms of grasping a ball with his hand and picking it up. And the physical therapist would do this with him hundreds of times per session. And they would get into what's called a patterning, to where if he did that enough, his muscles then, his brain would create a new neural net to control those muscles, to pick up a ball and grasp a ball and pick it up. And he did it. And he was able to replicate that over and over and over again. So we thought, well, if he was able to go through and maybe do that with a ball, I was thinking maybe he'd be able to go through and speak. And so we started with one of the basic sounds that we make, which is the M sound. So I would formulate, I would give him the example of what that sounded like, and he would put his lips together and he would vibrate them, but he couldn't open his mouth on his own. Eventually what he'd do is he would slip a little finger up to his chin and he'd go ma, and he would pull his chin down and he would try to say the word that way. But over about a month's worth of work on this, he got a little discouraged, and so we decided not to continue with that. We dropped it. And then not too long after that, he fell ill with a respiration pneumonia. And this was eventually what took his life, almost 7 years later. And so we were hospitalized. We were in an intensive care unit, and they had to thread an IV into him, and the only vein they could find was one on at the top of his little head. And so they shaved his curls and went through. His mom was holding him. I was holding his hands, much kind of like what you're seeing here. We're playing here in this picture. But I was holding his hands so he wouldn't reach up and grab the needle as it came toward his head. And as the nurse went through and threaded that IV into his head, um, this boy never cried, okay? And I don't know if that was because he was tough as nails or because he didn't have that connection, but he never cried. When she put that threaded IV into his head, he looked up at his mother and he said, "Mama," just like that. It was a miracle. The pattern stuck. He created that neural network, and he was able to go through and say, "Mama." And not just in terms of, "Mama, get that needle out of my head," but, "Mama, I love you." "Mama, get the dog out of my face." "Mama, I'm hungry." "Mama, my diaper needs changed." Mama. Mama meant everything. It was the only word, besides he mastered no as well. But those are the only two words he was able to use throughout his whole life. Now, he communicated to us non-verbally as well. We'll talk about that later on. But from a standpoint of expression, from a vocal channel, he capitalized on being able to say those two words that had a number of different meanings to them. Well, let's finish the word. F, na, me, non. Little jaw action now. N, non, happening within that. Yeah, it's important that we understand the miracle that we have, the ability that we have to be vocal. And most of us, like I said, take it for granted. We don't even think twice about it. So the next time you say to somebody that you love them, keep that in mind, your ability to be able to do that. The next channel is the auditory channel. This is our ears. We have all kinds of things involved in that too. We have the oral canal, we have the tympanic membrane, we have the malleus there, the incus that vibrates back and forth and that plunges this little thing into the oval window, and that creates some sensation that goes through the cilia, and eventually, through some miracle of physiology, turns into sound inside of our brain, like my voice right now hitting your tympanic membranes. You probably might be wanting to listen to something else, but that's just the way it goes. The auditory channel. Next is the visual channel. And this one is interesting from a standpoint of its ability to see, obviously. We, at last count, were able to see 16 million colors. Now, I'm not sure who the person is who's counting that, and I'm not, but that's what they say. The color spectrum of the eye, what it's able to go through and do, and it has its limitations as well. We know that there are certain animals out there who can see sharper and clearer at nighttime, have better night vision, that kind of thing. But the problem with the eye is that it can be easily deceived. We can go through and manipulate different effects and things, and make our eyes think that they're seeing things that aren't there. Or we can go through and manipulate reality and trick the brain into go through and to try to make some kind of sense. And that's all done through that channel, through the visual channel. And that's what becomes problematic maybe with the visual channel, more so than the vocal channel can produce lies, and the auditory channel can go through and have some noise, which we'll get to here later on in the semester as well. So the next channel I want to get into is the olfactory channel. This is the sense of smell. And yes, it is a communicative channel, okay? And we've all experienced this on some level, maybe not in terms of a positive response, maybe to lavender or to baked bread. One of my earliest olfactory experiences was with my father's Buick Wildcat. This thing ran on 102 octane, and we lived in Montreal, Canada at the time, and he would warm the car up for a half an hour out in the garage before he ever took it out. And when he would leave and close the garage door, I would go out and just smell that, because it was the greatest smell. You will never know what 102 octanes burned through a nicely tuned V8 engine will smell like. And you're probably thinking, well, that explains a lot of brain damage that I have going on. But for me, it was an amazing aroma and brings back my childhood memories to that. I wish I could smell it again. We might like the smell of somebody who we're particularly close to. we love the smell of the neck and what happens around that. And even if it's a little on the salty side, not the perfumey side, or just the natural human endorphins that are that exist, that scent that's going on there, we respond to that, and we do that for a reason. Through a physiological response to the people that we're attracted to, the people that we love. And then there's some people that maybe we're not so attracted to. If you've ever been in public transportation, you know what I mean in terms of certain odors that might proliferate there. The next channel after olfactory is it's one of my favorite channels, is the gustatory channel. And that's the channel of taste. And yes, this is a communicative channel. And you might be thinking, in terms of sensual sexuality kinds of things that way. But you know what? We engage in this daily in terms of taste. And when we go through and we share that taste with somebody else, man, that opens up our minds and our hearts for more meaning. And tastes are complicated. We go through and kind of discount what's happening to us in terms of what we eat. Chocolate probably is the most ubiquitous example here. And if you know chocolate, there's a whole range, a broad range of taste in terms of chocolate, from real light milk chocolate down to real dark cacao, and what that does to us. Actually, the darker the chocolate, the more flavor combinations are imbued within that morsel, up to 100, 150 different kinds of flavors. The more complicated that gets in terms of those flavors, the more complicated the taste gets. Coffee, for example, and it also has that range of flavors, but it gets up into 200, 250 different types of combinations of flavors that for some tongues, are, unless they're conditioned to that kind of overpowers that, maybe becomes bitter, and we can't taste the other tastes that are going on within that. Or we'll take a step farther and we get into wine. And what wine can do, up to 300 different flavor combinations, again, depending on the grape, where it's grown, and how it's fermented, and how it's decanted, and how it's drunk. All these things come together. But what all those flavor combinations do is they light up the brain. When we eat, and we eat something good, and when we're responding favorably to that, it's more than just that alimentary canal response, our mouth, our throat, our stomach, our gut. No, it goes to the brain too. Our pleasure centers are being opened up. And when those pleasure centers open up, so does communication. And it's not just the effect of alcohol or any other stimulant or anything. It's as simple as, wow, this tastes really good, and I'm with you, and you're enjoying it too, and let's talk about that. It's a great channel to get involved in. One last channel here, and that's the tactile channel. And what's interesting, the research shows that out of all of these 6 channels, the tactile channel is probably the most powerful. And not just because it's from the largest organ in the body, the skin, but because of the contact that we make within that tactile presence going on. And so we can use the tactile channel to go through and express emotion. Unfortunately, we also use it to go through and express anger. And that's the reason why this channel has the most powerful breadth to it, because the channel alone, can go through and receive messages of love and messages of violence or trauma or hate as well. And so how we how we manage to touch somebody, and what our hands feel like when we do touch somebody, speaks volumes to us. Here's a little lesson here, for example. The palms of our hands are wired from a touch standpoint, from a neurological standpoint, to go through and pick up heat and moisture and texture, those kinds of things. And not a whole lot else there. When we hold somebody's hand, we're palm to palm, we can go through and detect heat, whether it's dry or it's sweaty or whatever, and through that we can interpret that. But there's nothing else really there going on in terms of what that does to our brain systems in terms of dopamine and serotonin. The back of the hand is a different story. Rub or rub your own back of the hand across the knuckles, underneath the thumbnail, and to the first knuckle there, and the brain goes through and starts messing with your levels of dopamine and serotonin. If you're in education and you have a chance to watch somebody who is on the spectrum of autism, and they might be in an insecure situation, watch what they do with their hands. Their thumbs might be curled in to their palm with their forefinger curled over the top of them, and they're rubbing right beyond that knuckle, right between that thumbnail and the knuckle. And what that does, they're self-medicating. It goes through and helps calm them down. So to do that to somebody else, if you've ever consoled somebody at a funeral or somebody who's received bad news, we don't do that at the palm of the hand. We rub the top of the hand, and we do that to go through and soothe and try to assuage, try to say, it's okay. So that's it for part 1, okay, of this whole model. Hopefully you've been able to go through and write all this down and illustrate this way. And be sure to watch part 2 and part 3, okay? Part 2 will get into context, which is highly important, context and noise. And then part 3 gets into the idea of noise and effects and what goes on with that, all right? See you there.